Hello and welcome to another lap guide for the Camel GT series in iRacing. For week 9, we're at Road America. So here's the lap first without commentary. Okay, so lap time there is a 150.657. We are in afternoon weather, so track temps will get up into the warmer side. This is 103 Fahrenheit track temp for this particular session. I will be sharing a couple of different setups for this track in the description. One for the really more cooler end, probably more like 85 Fahrenheit and lower, and then above that I have another setup which will be labeled hot, which I find helps a bit in the warmer weather, where you get a little bit of understeer on corner entry. I raise the rake of the car by raising the rear ride height a little bit, and I adjust the differential a little bit. Tire pressures will probably be a little lower as well for the race setup to try to avoid overheating and help a little bit with traction there. So anyhow, that's just a quick note there before we get into this turn by turn. So let's see, let's go back to the lap. Going up to turn 1, I'm going to start getting on the brakes right at about the 3 cone here, but not reaching threshold braking until just before the 1 cone actually. So you'll see starting to get to the brakes a bit, and then just a quick threshold brake of about 80% at about this point here. So if your target is to get to threshold brake before you get to the first cone, I think that's a good target marker there. Also, make sure to get the car as close to the grass as you possibly can. Give yourself as much room to carry as much speed through the corner as you can. Now, I don't start to turn in until just before the darker extended road here on the left-hand side. You can see the wheel will start to just gradually turn in here as I start to now come off the brakes. Trail braking into the corner a little bit. You may find it necessary to tap the brakes further if you're running a little bit wide here, but the marker that I'm looking at visually at this point is the curbing, and aiming to use really all of the curbing here to the right. So you'll see the car reaching the curbing there at that point and getting back to throttle right about here. So right at about the midpoint there of the curbing, getting back to throttle, and then gradually rolling on the throttle until reaching full throttle really once the car has crossed the road here and reached the curbing on the opposite side. So quite a bit of throttle, 50-60% here already, and then rolling on throttle, still turning pretty hard here at this point. So not reaching full throttle now until right here. Now you can actually use a little bit of the dirt here on the corner exit. You see how much is used there in this example without an off track. And I typically do use a little bit of the dirt there. Pretty safe as long as the car is relatively straight here. When you're on full throttle, you're not going to lose traction, so that works out pretty well. So let's watch that with race. I'm sorry, at regular speed here. All right, so coming up on turn 3. Yes, this is actually turn 2. Right here in the middle is turn 2. So coming up on turn 3. As far as brake markers go, kind of difficult. The 1 and the 2 board are really probably the best markers to use. I think I start braking just after the 2, and again, threshold brake before the 1. So pretty similar to turn 1. You'll see starting to get to brakes here, and then quick threshold brake 80% again, and it's still happening before getting to the 1. So that's the threshold braking there. I think I might have locked the tires just briefly here. Let's see if we can hear that. Yeah, just a bit. So maybe a little hard on the brakes there. And it is a downhill, so you'll see a few other corners where I actually exceed threshold just a bit, and but very briefly. Again, you want to keep the car hug the left-hand side, and there's actually a little bit of the line in the white line on the left kind of comes out a little bit. This spot that I'm pointing to here, that's kind of what I'm using as a turn-in point. So you can see I'm starting to turn just as I'm reaching that line there. So that's a good marker to turn in. Still braking pretty hard. So even though I'm reaching threshold brake right here, I'm still carrying a lot of braking to that point, but starting to ease off the brakes as I turn in, and now fully off the braking. And again, planning to use the curbing here on the right. So there we are up on the curbing to the right, and now getting back to throttle right here. So starting to get back to full throttle, and again, reaching full throttle by the time the car has crossed the road there. So I typically use all of the curbing on corner exit, and again, you can actually touch the dirt lightly here on corner exit. Okay, so coming down, turn 4 was just, I believe, this mark right here would be considered turn 4 down into the moraine sweep. And as we come down the moraine sweep, we're going up to turn 5. The marker here to begin braking is about the 2, and reaching threshold braking soon after. I think I exceeded threshold just a tad again. Like I say, I locked up a few places here. So 80% or so is about threshold brake. So that's just past the 2. So if you look at that, it's maybe just between the 1 and the 2. And again, keeping the car to the right here. So let's see what the braking sounds like there. Yeah, fair bit of lock up there. So coming down, this is probably one of the heaviest braking zones. I think it is the heaviest braking zone. And if you're prioritizing corners, I'd say turn 3 is priority 2. Turn 14, which is your final corner, which we'll talk about, the last turn is your priority 1 corner as far as the most important corner. So turn 3, which was the corner before this straight, was probably the second highest priority. Those are your 2 best passing zones on the track. The kink, which is a little bit later, is probably a priority 3 as being another potential passing zone as well. So those are the ones that you really want to nail and get a really good exit, and those are your best passing opportunities if you're right up close to your opponent. Using the draft will then allow you to complete the pass. So braking very hard and continuing to hold the brakes. So you'll see how long the brakes are being held here. Keeping the car right, being patient on turn in, and again aiming to use the curbing here as we cross the corner. So turning in happens, I guess you're starting to turn in right at about this point here. Gradual turn in. Increasing radius here as we now cross the curbing. So the angle or the line that the car takes across the curbing is kind of across the early, it's a little bit of an early apex almost. And I like to run wide on corner exit here. This car handles it just fine. You can actually use all of the runoff here, so the car is not unsettled too much at all. So I don't have any trouble using that there on the exit. I feel like I'm able to get back to throttle sooner with this line here. So starting to get back to throttle just as the car leaves the curbing here. And then back to full throttle there already. So let's watch that at speed again. All right, so coming up on turn 6. So the braking marker again is kind of difficult to point out anything specific. I'm not looking for a marker myself. What I'm thinking of doing is getting my braking done prior to the crest of the hill, where the car's going to lighten up and it's going to be difficult to brake hard as you get to the top of this hill here. So my threshold is really right at about this point, right at this. Again, I'm not finding anything specific. And of course, your field of view, I know the signs here on the left could be used based on where your view is and where your field of view reaches those. So that's something to practice there. But threshold, before you reach to the top of the hill, is a good idea there. And you can start to gradually ease off of those, off the braking as you get to the top there. Be patient on turn in here again. And one of the common mistakes I made on this corner was to just turn in a little bit too early, which led to an awkward line and leads to some trouble on corner exit and late throttle, which I'll point out those points here. So not turning in quite yet. Now just as the car has kind of passed the end of the wall here, this taller wall for the bridge, starting to turn in, easing off the brakes, and aiming to use the curbing here on the left, and getting back to throttle right there at the apex of the corner. Now, this is the point where if you turned in a little too soon, you're going to apex too soon. You won't be able. You're actually going to do your rotating a little further. The car's going to rotate a little bit further up here, and you're going to run a little wide. And the traction just over the curbing here is pretty slippery. So I don't recommend using any of the asphalt here on the opposite side of the painted curb, because it gets rather slippery there. So the line here, which I found works out pretty quick here without using that extra bit of road, is ideal. I'll watch that back from the beginning. All right, so now we're reaching turn 7. So on turn 7, I kind of take a little bit of an early turn in here. And this is another corner where you can kind of get into trouble using too much curbing. So I actually recommend not using this early curbing if you can help it. In this case, I actually used a fair amount of curbing. And so you'll see as I come into the corner, a little bit of an early turn in, and the car's aiming to use the curbing here, but it's pretty risky actually. The car can take an odd hop. I wasn't too heavy on throttle, and so I think I was okay. If you're a little heavier on throttle, when the car takes that little bit of a hop, you're going to actually slide. And so I'm going to show you an example of where that happened to show exactly what you want to avoid on this corner. So let's go ahead and jump up to that. All right, so watch what happens here when I do I take really the exact same line, but my throttle work was sloppy, so it led to a slide. So that's what you want to avoid, and that's why I would recommend not using this curbing too much. And if you find yourself running a line that takes you into that curbing, don't get as heavy on throttle because of that hop that's going to cause the car to slide. So watch what happens here with the throttle, almost full throttle, and then here's the hop that the car takes, and then it slides just as it kind of comes back to the surface there. And even though I'm not quite full throttle, that's enough at that speed and with this track temp, that combination of factors is just enough to send the car into a slide. So watching that one more time at speed to see how that looks. So again, the line looks nearly identical to the lap that I'm showing, but just exceeded the point of traction with that extra bit of throttle. So that's where I'm going to recommend maybe not using much. Maybe lightly touching that curbing will be okay. But again, the more you get up on this curbing here to the right, the more of a bounce the car is going to kind of take, and you're going to have some trouble there with traction loss and sliding there. So definitely be careful with that. However, on corner exit, you can use all of the curbing here to the left, and you can see I do use all of it here in this example there. But anyhow, let's just play that one more time at speed. All right, so coming down Hurry Downs and into turn 8. Turn 8 is another pretty heavy braking zone. It's another corner where I think a lot of late braking happens and gets you into trouble here, and some spins will happen on corner exit here as well. So let's get up to the braking point. You can see that I start to brake fairly early and getting the threshold brake maybe just before the 2. So my common error was to brake a little later than this, and it always led to problems on the corner exit. You want to get a good exit to this corner leading into the carousel so that you can get a good throttle point there. So braking just a little earlier for me helped, and moving up my braking point to this point, 80% threshold brake right there is a good target. So as we come forward, carrying a lot of braking still, but easing off. And now beginning to turn in, probably about where this white line is, starting to turn in, and aiming to use all of the curbing to the left. I find that if I don't, I run wide, it delays throttle too much. So I definitely like to use this curbing here, but the car can slide out on you. So as you start to get back to throttle here, extra cautious. Again, it's probably better to wait until you're over the curbing before you get back to throttle. I think the car does take a little bit of a slide. So when I play this back at speed, you'll notice that. You can use more curbing on exit, but in this case, the line that I took was a little safer, and I was able to get to full throttle at a good point without needing to use any of the curbing. But you can use more of that there on corner exit. Usually I find that happens when I haven't run quite the ideal line, though. It really is just extra road that you don't necessarily need, but you may find yourself using in some cases. So let's watch this one at speed. All right, so coming into the carousel, taking a bit of a wide entry, and my train of thought going into the carousel is to stay on throttle as much as possible, but not carry so much speed that it delays the throttle in kind of the second apex of the carousel. So as we go through this, starting wide, now shifting up, and what I like to do is kind of get real close on the right initially. So this is kind of your first apex, but carrying enough speed that with the amount of turning that's being done, the car is going to kind of gradually carry more toward the middle of the road, still on throttle. And now really modulating the amount of throttle that you're doing here, not having to adjust your steering angle too much, but really modulating throttle to get the car from running too wide. And then now at this point, spotting your apex as being right at about where the curbing here is on the right, and gradually now getting back to full throttle as soon as you possibly can, where the car is going to stay real tight to the right, but then carrying as much speed as the car now is at full throttle, that it's going to run all the way to the exit curbing on the left. So now I didn't get quite as close as I could have here, but I did carry a good amount of speed. So I think the throttle point, getting back to full throttle right there, I think is a good point. And now carrying full throttle all the way through the corner. And when with the amount of speed you're carrying there, you're going to be using the exit curbing there on the left. You can see how much of that is used. Yep, sorry about my camera controls. So let's go ahead and play this through. So just a couple of other notes about some things you may find happening as you come through the carousel. In the first apex of the carousel, if you find yourself carrying a little too much speed, this is the mid corner point where you're going to probably have to just tap the brakes lightly if you find yourself carrying just a tad bit too much speed. So the amount of braking that you tap there or throttle, again, it's going to be just modulating to get the car set up to get back to that throttle point as soon as you can. So this is kind of where you got to have a feel for how much speed you're carrying, where the car is at, and obviously focus on where your throttle point needs to be as you come around the corner. In some cases, I actually have found myself not carrying enough speed. And so what I end up doing is as I'm coming around the corner here and I'm going a little slower, the car won't run as wide, so I'm much tighter to the right hand side of the road, and I don't really run out to the midpoint here. And in that case, I feel like I maybe overslowed the car just a little bit, or just came off the throttle a little too much. So I'm hugging the right a little bit more, and you can still get back to throttle at a good point, but it might be a little harder to gauge where that is because you have a little bit less road to work with as your angle comes back in. So if you're a little bit too tight here, you can still carry a nice amount of speed, like I say, but it might be a little harder to time it. And so that's going to, every lap through here will be slightly different. And so it's just something you've got to get the feel for and develop the timing and the feel for where your apex is here on corner exit. And we're full throttle all the way from this point all the way down to Canada corner. So the I think I said the kink was third priority of the corner. Really the carousel is because you're full throttle all the way down from here. So if you get a nice exit on the carousel and a good throttle point and you're directly behind your opponent, between here and Canada corner is another good passing zone here on the track. So using the curbing here on the left, you don't necessarily have to use as much of the curbing as I've used here. The car gets through here relatively easily, full throttle all the way out. Really just straightening out the road as much as you can, keep that speed up. Okay, so braking point into Canada corner. Starting to get on brakes between the 3 and the 4, but threshold brake actually I think happens after the 3. Yeah, and again, I think I had a brief lockup here, but about 70 to 80% braking is a good target for threshold braking. So let's see where we are on speed. So 175 miles per hour before we start to brake, and then threshold brake between the 2 and the 3. And it's going to be a hard continuous braking that's going to start to ease off. Of course, as the car begins to slow, you've got to ease off to avoid continuing to lock it up. And we're going to continue to ease off here. A little bit more extra braking as I continue to modulate that and get the speed to where it needs to be. And being patient on turning here. This corner I find is a lot of fun, but it's also another corner where you can have some traction loss issues on the exit. Down into second gear, being patient here to turn in now until about this point here. There isn't really a visual marker other than if you're looking at shadows, which is not a good marker to use, but aiming to use all of the curbing here to the right. You can actually come up into the dirt a little bit here without an off track, but as far as traction is concerned, I wouldn't advise using it. Getting back to throttle here at the apex of the corner. This is where you're going to have issues with traction if you're too eager and too heavy on the throttle. A little bit of traction loss can occur right here at the apex, and as well as in the darker asphalt here to the left, and I do lose just a little there. You'll see a little bit of a quick catch and a correction there as the car gets a little loose as I come into this. So there's actually, I think, 3 places where you could potentially put the car into a slide here. The first is the apex. The second is as you come off into the asphalt here. And the third is really toward the end of it, and you can actually use some of the gravel area here and without an off track. And if you just use a little bit too much of that, you can also spin very quickly right there as well. So 3 points to be careful of as you come around Canada there. So let's go ahead and watch that back at speed. Okay, so come through Thunder Valley and up into Bill Mitchell Bend. I like to use the curbing here on the right to set up the turn-in point to the corner there. So coming up here, you'll see the car's up on the curbing a bit, starting to turn in already as I come off that curbing, and starting to let off throttle just a bit, just a lift. Now, in this particular lap, I didn't use any of the curbing to the left. I usually do use a bit of it, so maybe this is an example that you don't necessarily need to use it to carry a good amount of speed through there, but more often than not, I touch and get up on that curbing a little bit. But getting back to full throttle now at this point, and sometimes I'll touch the curbing here on the right, but you definitely want to use more. You're more likely to use curbing here to the left than on the exit, and maybe to avoid running wide on exit. A lot of problems can occur when you run wide on exit here. There's some bumps and things that'll unsettle the car to the right. So if I can avoid the curbing to the right, that's better. But you can't touch that if you need to. So let's go ahead and play that back. So right at this point, you want to get to the left as quickly as you can to set up your braking zone into turn 14, which to me is priority 1 corner on the track. And it's obviously before the long front straight. It's a great passing zone, and it's also at the point where you typically are going to be closer to your opponent in front, where you can complete a pass. And so I think this is one of the more common passing zones, probably the most common passing zone on the track. So setting up for this corner is important. So getting over to the left real quickly here, starting to brake as the car reaches the darker shade of asphalt there. Threshold brake will happen afterward. The car is already, the road is starting to curve inward already. I wouldn't try not to confuse that with your turning radius or where your turn-in point is. Other than just not running wide, you want to avoid running wide. So the braking zone, you want to try to keep the car straight here in the braking zone, getting to about a 50 to 60% brake, being patient to turn in. Treat it as a 90-degree corner, but you want to actually early apex and very early throttle, maybe just before you reach the curbing here to the left or to the right. So in this case, I've started to turn in before reaching this extended road here on the left, not using that, and starting to turn in right now at that point. So my turn-in point, you can see there's a little bit of a turning angle just because of the angle of the road, but really not thinking about turning into the corner until right about here. So now starting to turn in, getting the car turned in early apex, and back to throttle already. So an early throttle here is important because, again, it's the longest straight that you want to carry as much speed through as you can. So that early throttle is important. The only instance where I might actually use some of the extra road here is to get an even earlier throttle on your out lap prior to qualifying lap. So if you want to actually just set up, getting up over here to the left even further, and then kind of turning in toward the end of that, and then getting a really early throttle, maybe even earlier than this, to get even better run on that front straight, you could do so. but it's something you'll definitely have to practice. That line can be a little bit tricky to take. So anyway, that's just a thought or an option there. So let's see here, coming in, getting back to throttle right about here, about 30% or so, 50% on the curbing, and now back to full throttle as we reach the other side. You can use all of this safely, and I typically do use the asphalt here on the opposite side of the curbing. Of course, just being sure to get back to the racing surface as you come across. You actually can use some of the grass here, but pretty dangerous to do so at full throttle here. You could potentially slide if the car is being turned any more than this and you come up into the grass, so try to avoid that, but you can use it with an out and off track. So let's watch the final corner at full speed. All right, so that's a lap of Road America. Hope you found this helpful. Talk to you later.